Happy Wednesday. It is good to be back with you again today as we continue our study in the book of Genesis. Today we're going to be looking at chapters 18, or the end of chapter 18, and all of chapter 19. And I'm constantly amazed as I begin preparing for these kinds of things and doing extensive studies like this on just how much material there is here. Who would have thought that there would be so much richness in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah? It's a story I think that we're all kind of on the surface, at least, familiar with different bits and pieces of it. But as you'll find out as we continue in our study today, you'll find out that there's just a whole lot that we are not quite as aware of and that we haven't maybe paid as much attention to. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and dig right in. So chapter 18 of Genesis, beginning at verse 16. I'm going to just read here at the beginning. When the men got up to leave, remember these are the three visitors to Abraham and Sarah at the Oaks of Mamre. It is an appearance of the Holy Trinity. It is the Lord himself who has appeared, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. So verse 16, when the men got up to leave, they looked down towards Sodom, and Abraham walked along with them to see them on their way. There is only one other person in the Bible that we are told has walked with God, and that is, if you remember way back in the beginning chapters, Enoch, who is a descendant of Adam, a great-grandson or something, great, I don't remember how many greats, walked with God and was taken away. So Abraham is also one who walks with God. And then it's interesting, the Lord speaks. Verse 17, then the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? There is a kind of a warning here of some coming destruction. And Abraham is given a couple of reasons that God is going to be telling him about what's coming up. God warns Abraham of this coming destruction. But he does this, I think, for a couple of reasons: to reassure him and also to remind Abraham of his responsibilities. And those responsibilities are what had been given to Abraham before. The first one is to become a channel of blessing. Remember, I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. All nations of the world will be blessed through you. And then secondly, to teach righteousness and justice, the righteousness and justice of God. So when you look then at verse 18, he reminds Abraham of this. Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all nations on earth will be blessed through him. For I have chosen him, so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised him. So this is a reminder here of the promise of the steadfastness and love and mercy of God that has been directed and promised to Abraham. And then verse 20, now we hear, the Lord said, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin so grievous, that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will know. And then we're told in verse 22, the men turned away and went towards Sodom, but Abraham remained standing before the Lord. So there's a separation here now. There are two who have separated, and have headed on their way towards Sodom, toward their mission there. But the Lord God, who we presume probably is the Father, stays to speak with Abraham. And Abraham approaches him, and Abraham seems to know what's coming. And he says, but wait a minute, will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? And then this system of bartering begins. Abraham barters with God. It's kind of a familiar system in the Middle East. You kind of try and talk people down in price until you come to something agreeable. And so this bartering happens for the remainder of that chapter. At first it starts with 50 people. God says, no, I'm not going to wipe them out if there's 50 people. And then it goes to 45, then to 40, then to 30, then to 20. And finally they land on 10 is what they agree at. God says, no, I won't destroy them if there are, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. And then he leaves and Abraham returns home. So the question then, when we read this passage, one of the first things that kind of jumps into our minds is, did Abraham change God's mind? It's one of the questions that we find ourselves asking as we read this passage. Did Abraham change the mind of God? And certainly that's a logical question for us to ask. Or I think a better question to ask for us here is, did God change Abraham's mind about the character of God and about God's justice and mercy? And I think the answer to that question, of course, is yes. I think God reassures Abraham that he is merciful, but he is also just. And so his mercy is given in the promise that for the sake of 10 righteous people, he will not destroy this area that is so sinful. So let's talk a little bit then before we move on to chapter 19 about Sodom and Gomorrah. And we're given a clue here, or an indication, in verse 20 of chapter 18. The Lord said, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin so grievous. They are a stark contrast to what God desires here. They are a dark opposite of blessing, righteousness, and justice. And when we are told that the outcry is great and the sin is so grievous, it is bad enough that God himself will go. And this reassures Abraham then that God's judgment is based on fact, that the impending judgment here is based on something that God himself will look to see. It's important for us to understand what words mean here in this passage. The word outcry is used in many places in Scripture to describe utter depravity, oppression, brutalization. It is heinous moral and social corruption. It's an arrogant disregard of basic human rights. The poor and the needy were neglected. We're told that later in Ezekiel, chapter 16, verse 49, that the poor and needy were neglected. And we can assume that they were also brutalized. So it's a really horrible situation. These two cities and surrounding areas have sunk to great depths. And the sin is really awful, and God himself is going to rain justice down upon them, and to determine what that justice is. I think it's also important for us to understand here that the sin that we are speaking of is not just sexual sin. It is many, many things. It is a violent, violent place. It is a place where people hurt other people, probably just for the near sport of it, I guess. So here we are with this situation, and God himself is going to check out and see what this is, what the situation is. So we begin at verse 1 of chapter 19. The two angels arrived at Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of the city. When he saw them, he got up to meet them, and he bowed down with his face to the ground. My lords, he said, please turn aside to your servant's house. You can wash your feet and spend the night, and then go on your way early in the morning. So Lot has an indication here that these are good people, and perhaps maybe even holy people. They are visitors to the city, and I think Lot also understands that these people will not be safe in this city that he has made a home in. Lot lives here. Because he's sitting at the gate of the city, it kind of indicates to us that Lot has a position of some importance or influence in the city. And so he encourages the men, he invites the men to come to his home. He extends hospitality to them, much the same as Abraham did previously when they came to visit Abraham and Sarah at the oaks at Mamre. Lot invites them in. And at first they say, no, we're just going to stay here in the square. But Lot insists very strongly. And so they go to his house, and he prepares a meal for them, and they eat. But before they can all retire for the night, something happens. We are told in Verse 4, before they had gone to bed, all the men from every part of the city of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house. They called to Lot, where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we can have sex with them. You know, it's important, I think, to understand here what is going on. It is not probably just the act of a sexuality that is the great sin. It is continuing the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah, and that is this arrogance of disregard of human dignity, and that they're wanting to brutalize these visitors. And it's almost like they take pleasure in this act of brutalization. They make a sport almost of it, of brutalizing people. And so they're all banging on Lot's door. They've surrounded his house, and they're wanting to get in. And Lot is considered to be a righteous person. We're told over and over again in many places in Scripture that he was a righteous person. We're also told here that he was an alien. He was a stranger. He wasn't born there. As a matter of fact, he was kind of a transplant into that area, and they remind him of that he's an alien. But that doesn't necessarily mean, his righteousness doesn't necessarily mean that he is perfect. But at least he feels something. At least he understands that this is not right, and he wants to protect these two visitors. Lot knows very well what the sin of Sodom is, and he knows that these people have sunk to an all-time low. and he's trying to stop it. But then, this is the thing that just really kind of has baffled me until I did the study for this today. Lot's response to this in verse 8, he goes outside to the guys and he goes, don't do this. This is wicked. And then he offers up his daughters. He says, look, I've got 2 daughters who have never slept with a man. Let me bring them out to you, and you can do what you like with them. But don't do anything because they've come to these men, because they've come under the protection of my roof. Now, many times as I've read this, I get a little perturbed and disgusted with Lot offering his daughters out to these men. When I was reading a commentary in preparation for this today, I saw something that made just a whole ton of sense and made me feel a little bit better about Lot in all of this. The commentator, in looking at the kind of the traditions of the times and the area and everything, sees Lot's offering of his daughters as kind of an attempt by Lot to jolt them into reality. His daughters, we are told later on in the chapter, are betrothed to men of the area. And in that custom and in that tradition, to violate a woman who is betrothed to a man is a serious penalty. And the penalty for violating a betrothal was death. And so Lot's attempt here is to jolt them into reality, to get them to understand. One can probably assume, since we're told that all the men of the city were there, one can assume that perhaps Lot's daughters betrothed were among this group. And so Lot is trying to say, look, guys, this is a bad idea. It's just as bad an idea as if I were to offer my daughters to you. There are severe penalties for this. So Lot tries to stop. I think it's a rather weak way that Lot tries to stop them, but he clearly feels that something needs to be done. This is wrong, and he tries to stop them. That doesn't work, though. The men persist, and they are ready to beat the door down. Finally, God intervenes and strikes all these people blind, kind of throws them into a state of confusion. He's rescuing Lot, essentially, from this pitiful attempt to stop this madness. The people remain outside, and they're milling about. They're all confused and probably getting quite angry. And so Lot is saved, and because all of a sudden then in verse 10, the men inside, these are angels or members of the Trinity, they reach inside, they reach out and pull Lot back into the house, and then they shut the door. And then they warn Lot. Verse 12, the 2 men said to Lot, do you have anyone else here? Do you have sons-in-law or sons or daughters or anyone else in the city who belongs to you? Get them out of here, because we are going to destroy this place. The outcry to the Lord against its people is so great that he has sent us to destroy it. Remember, we talked about this, the outcry of the people to the Lord. This place has gone past the point of no return. This place is without hope, and it's going to be destroyed. And they're warning Lot, get your family and the people that you love and care about, get them out of here, because things are going to get bad. So Lot tries to warn his daughter's betrothed, his potential son-in-laws, but they don't believe him. They think that he is joking. that he's kind of making this up. And so the angels are urging Lot, hurry up, get this out, get out of here, get this show on the road. You need to leave right now, or you're going to be swept away when this city is punished. And then I think it's very interesting in verse 16 what happens. Lot hesitates. Verse 16, when he hesitated, the men grasped his hand and the hands of his wife and of his 2 daughters and led them safely out of the city, for the Lord was merciful to them. What a picture of God's grace and mercy here. Lot hesitates, and yet God saves. God grabs Lot and his wife and his daughters and runs them out of the city. I kind of, wonder about Lot's hesitation here when I read this. Why does he hesitate? I mean, he's been told. He clearly understands that these beings are messengers of God. I kind of think that the reason Lot hesitates is because I think he gets lazy. He's gotten comfortable with living this life, and that goes even further as we look at them. I mean, they take him out of the city and they say, run for your lives and don't look back and don't stop anywhere. Just run to the mountains, get far away from here. And Lot stops and he's like, no, I don't want to go to the mountains. How about if I go to this little town over here? It's small, and you can spare my life if I'm in that town. Lot has a lot of audacity here, I think. Lot doesn't want to go back to the nomadic lifestyle. Lot has gotten very comfortable in the cushy living in the city with everything that brings along with it. He doesn't want to go back. He doesn't trust that God will protect him on his way to the mountains. So he convinces God, and God agrees to this, to let him go to a nearby city. And that city is named Zoar. Again, we are given a very clear message here that it is divine grace alone that is the basis for Lot and his family's salvation. So by the time they reach Zoar, then they get there safely, and then the Lord starts raining down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah. And the cities are completely wiped out. Everything is got. And then everything is gone. But then we're giving this little kind of a footnote in verse 26. But Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Interesting, isn't it? Why does Lot's wife look back, and why then is she turned into a pillar of salt? I think it's more than that she just looks back. I think it's that she stops. And perhaps she doesn't want to go any further. She doesn't want to leave it all behind. She wants all the stuff. She's gotten pretty comfortable living in this city. As depraved as it is, she's gotten very comfortable. She has fallen prey to the love of stuff. And so because of that, I think she doesn't make it to Zoar. I think she ends up getting destroyed by this raining down of sulfur, and then suffers her fate as a result of that, and is turned into, encased in this sulfur and everything that's coming down. She becomes a pillar of salt. And then, sadly, we are told then in verse 27, early the next morning, Abraham got up and returned to the place where he had stood before the Lord. He looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah, toward all the land of the plain, and he saw dense smoke rising from the land, like smoke from a furnace. Abraham sees that sadly there were not 10 good people, and the places were not spared. And so, verse 29, so when God destroyed the cities of the plain, he remembered Abraham, and he brought Lot out of the catastrophe. He brought Lot out of the cities where he had lived. One would think, after all of this happens, that Lot would return to Abraham, that he would go back home to the place, to family, to the place where he feels comfortable and safe. But that's not what he does. We're given yet another piece of the story here. Lot then, verse 30, Lot and his 2 daughters left Zoar, so they leave that little city that they were saved in, or kept safe in, and they settle in the mountains. And he and his 2 daughters lived in a cave. Lot has fallen prey to fear. Fear now rules his life, and he no longer trusts in God's ability to save him. He and his daughters are holed up in a cave. And then we are told then Lot really fails his daughters as a father because he doesn't find husbands for them. And the daughters panic. And we're given this kind of gruesome story here. The older daughter and the younger daughter are afraid that their line isn't going to continue. There's no men around. Their betrothed have been burned up in the cities. Lot is holed up in a cave with them. And their hope of being able to continue and do any kind of a family, be any part of a family or raise families, is quickly disappearing. So they concoct this really ridiculous plan to get their dad drunk and to have sex with him and conceive children. The sin of Sodom and this sin of fear is passed down from Lot then to his daughters, who then pass it down to their children. It is a reminder or a remnant of the sin of Sodom that has continued to live in them. Lot and his family got comfortable in Sodom, and they liked the prosperity that they had, the comforts and the culture, and they were willing to overlook some of the big problems here. And finally, things got bad enough that they ended up having to be rescued and leave. And one would think then that they would return to God, but that's not what happens at all. In fact, they continue to continue to live in that kind of lifestyle. So then what happens is these daughters get pregnant as a result of the incest with their father, and they each give birth to a son. One's son is named Moab, and the other is Ben-Ami. And then we are told in verse 37, beginning of verse 37, the older daughter had a son, and she named him Moab. He is the father of the Moabites of today. And then verse 38, the younger daughter also had a son, and she named him Ben-Ami. He is the father of the Ammonites of today. So the Moabites and the Ammonites are the two greatest enemies of the Israelites. And this will continue to be a problem for the Israelite people for many, many years to come. Lot is guilty here, as is his daughter. Lot has failed his daughters and has passed down this sin then to his daughters and consequently to his sons/grandsons. He's guilty. He was drunk, we are told, but being drunk is not an excuse for what he did. He still remains guilty. And unfortunately, then, as we close this chapter, that is the last mention that we have of Lot. I think it's important for us to see, however, that there's a glimmer of promise, and this is where it's helpful to know the hope, to know the rest of Scripture so that we can see a glimmer of hope here. Because this Moabite people, the people of Moab, that may sound familiar to you, and one of Jesus' ancestors actually comes from the Moabite people, and that is Ruth. Ruth, who becomes the great-grandmother of King David. Ruth is listed in the genealogy of Jesus in chapter 1 of Matthew. This is a disturbing chapter in the Bible, or a disturbing couple of chapters in the Bible. But I think they're there for a reason. I think it's important for us to understand the lessons that we see here. Sodom and Gomorrah are important because they continue, and the sin of these towns exhibited continue to exist to this day. Clearly, they have not been wiped out. We live with violence on the earth, and we leave the poor to die on the streets, and the homeless, unborn, are killed before they can ever see birth. We don't value the elderly. There are a lot of forms of violence and moral depravity that take place in the world today. Pornography and child sexual abuse, child abuse, spousal abuse, all of those kinds of things. All of those things happen still today. But I think the essential truth that we have from this particular chapter in the history of humanity is that we are reassured once again that God is righteous and just. God is merciful, but he is also just. His judgments will be carried out, as will his mercies. And that will never change. God hears the outcries of humanity. He hears all of these things, and it breaks his heart. The trick, I think, for us is to read these kinds of lessons and see the heart of the Lord and see how grieved he is and how badly he wants to protect us from the things that will hurt us in our rush to maybe ignore these kinds of injustices that continue to be carried out. It's a hard couple of chapters to read, hard to go through. I hope that I've given you some things to think about. I learned a lot kind of studying this. I encourage you to do some reading and underlining and do some kind of listening to what God has to say to us in these particular chapters of the history of humanity, and then take our lessons from that. Let's end our time together in prayer. Gracious God, we thank you for the gift of your word. We thank you that even difficult passages like this contain a note of encouragement, hope, and promise. Help us to see those nuggets of promise, those glimmers of hope. Help us to take them to heart, and help us to stand up and speak out for what is right and good and just, and to proclaim your mercy and grace to all of those who need so desperately to hear it. We ask that you bless us now as we continue throughout the week. We thank you and praise you. In the name of Jesus our Lord. Amen. All right, thank you for joining me. I will see you again next week.